People have found things that were never supposed to exist. Beneath the permafrost, where time stands still and all evidence should have been wiped away, something remains waiting. Siberia isn't just a frozen wasteland. It's a place where history has been pushed beyond the borders of memory. A land so white it looks bleached clean. But sometimes what's been erased doesn't disappear. It just lies still, waiting for the next person brave enough to dig deeper. No light, no sound, just the sharp crack of ice beneath your feet and the creeping sense that something's not right. Lands too vast to be watched. Forests too silent to feel natural. Traces too ancient to belong to humankind. Some call it isolation. But in that silence, something buried keeps whispering. No one really knows what it is. Only that every time the ice melts, another fragment of memory surfaces. Not a memory of humanity, but maybe of something that came before us. Tonight, we're not just looking at a map. We're looking at the fractures in the truth, the empty spaces history chose to ignore. Because some questions can't be answered by science. And some places, like Siberia, hold answers no one dares to speak. You're listening to Bedtime History. And this is where silence begins to tell its story. If what we see is only the surface, then maybe Siberia has never truly been explored. Because the most terrifying thing about this land doesn't lie above ground. It's hidden underneath. And there's one place in particular where every step feels like you're walking over a buried memory. Where time itself seems to have erased its presence to protect something. The locals call it by a name that sends chills down your spine. The Valley of Death. Tucked deep in the remote tiger forests of the Sakha Republic, near the Vilui River. A place few dare to visit twice. The Valley of Death doesn't look like a wasteland in the usual sense. There are no dry bones. No snowy fields of sorrow. But there are stories so strange that even the government once stayed silent. Hunters came back with bizarre burns on their skin. Animals vanished without a trace. And strangest of all, massive metal structures, dome-shaped, said to be buried underground, with only their curved tops peeking out when the ice melts in summer. No one knows exactly what they are. Those who've touched them say they're unnaturally cold, as if they absorb no heat, no matter how hot the air gets. Some even claim to have heard faint humming sounds from deep beneath the ground. Like metal ringing softly from somewhere far away. But then they stop talking. Some experience temporary memory loss. Others never returned. There are no official records of these metal domes. But there are scattered accounts. Old ones from 19th century Russian expeditions. They describe half-sphere objects larger than houses tilted in the ground like abandoned machines. One report described a dome as being made from a rustless alloy. Impossible to break. Impossible to cut. And that raises the obvious question. If modern technology still can't create something like that, who did? And when? Some theories suggest these are remnants of an ancient defense system. Maybe energy weapons or interplanetary communication devices from a time before humans ever walked the Earth. Others go even further. They say this area was once a monitoring station for a civilization not from here. And those structures, they're not dormant. They're still working quietly deep below the surface. Whatever the truth may be, there's one thing everyone agrees on. The land around these domes isn't normal. Compasses go haywire. Electronics glitch out. Plants grow twisted. It feels like you're standing on a crack in the world where some hidden force is still pulsing beneath your feet. You can't see it. You can't touch it. But you can feel it. No one knows how many domes are still buried in the ice. Dozens. Hundreds. Or maybe they're just the visible tips of something far bigger. A massive underground network stretching across Siberia with only a few peaks showing through the thinning ice. Like the tips of a giant machine. Asleep beneath the frost. And if Siberia really is sitting on something humanity has never known, then every map, every history, every belief about where we came from may have to be rewritten. But maybe that's exactly why this land was left to the snow and ice. Not to preserve it, but to hide it. Whatever's buried beneath the cold earth. Maybe it was never meant to be awakened. If in the Valley of Death people saw massive metal domes lying still beneath the frozen earth, then in Tunguska, all they heard was an explosion. They saw the flash, felt the pressure wave, and were left with questions no one could answer. No object, no crater, just an empty scar in the forest where 80 million trees were flattened outward, as if a giant hand had swept down from the sky. And it's that absence, the lack of clear evidence that makes the Tunguska event one of the deepest cracks in our modern understanding of the world. Early in the morning on June 30th, 1908, deep in the wild forests near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, a brilliant white-blue light streak. Witnesses described it as a second sun blazing low over the horizon. Then suddenly a shock wave. The sound shattered the air like thunder. But it didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground. The blast wave traveled hundreds of kilometers. Train stations across Europe and Asia registered tremors equivalent to a magnitude 5 or 6 earthquake. And yet at ground zero, nothing. No impact site. Just charred tree trunks still standing upright in the middle of a forest wiped clean as if the explosion hadn't hit the earth at all but came from beneath it. Since then, theories have poured in. A meteorite blast. A comet vaporized in the atmosphere. Maybe even a lost ancient energy weapon. Or worse, a technological accident from something not of this world. But none of the explanations add up. Why did polar lights appear hours before the blast? Why was no extraterrestrial material ever found? And why did the trees fall outward in a perfect radial pattern, as if something had exploded from the exact center of the forest with no visible source? During Stalin's era, some Soviet researchers quietly suggested that an ancient device buried deep underground may have detonated. Those reports quickly vanished from official archives. But rumors lived on. Whispers of a hidden network of structures or weapons buried in the Siberian permafrost. Far older than any civilization we've ever known. Perhaps linked to the very same metal domes once reported in the Valley of Death. And the questions only get stranger. Samples of soil and plant matter collected from the site show mild traces of radiation. Just enough to be odd. But not enough to suggest a nuclear blast. So, what kind of energy created a shock wave equal to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs? And if a meteor had vaporized midair, why wasn't there a telltale flash halo like we've seen in countless other impact events? Here's something even stranger. Hours before the explosion, the skies across Europe lit up with a strange glow. No sun, no moon. Yet from London to Moscow, people could read newspapers outside at midnight. Scientists chalked it up to atmospheric ice crystals. But the timing and scale of the phenomenon suggest otherwise. It was like a fog rolled in not just over the land, but over the truth of Tunguska itself. Could the explosion have come not from the sky, but from something buried deep in the earth? Some ancient system triggered by shifts in the planet's magnetic field. Or worse, was it a warning? Over a century has passed, and the forest has grown back. But in the blast center, tree rings still show something isn't right. Some trees grew abnormally fast. Others didn't grow at all for years. as if life itself there was still reacting to a wound that never healed. And if that's true, if Siberia wasn't just the victim of a natural disaster, but the source of something far more mysterious, then everything we're seeing today is just the surface. A surface resting above a force that's been dormant for far too long. And when it wakes, no one knows what comes next. But before that explosion shook the earth, there was a city round, just like the mark left behind in Tunguska, quietly resting in the southern plains. Didn't burn, didn't explode, but somehow it vanished from every ancient map. A place some have called the Atlantis of Russia. And it may be that its very perfection is what made it disappear. Arm was discovered in 1987, when plans to build a reservoir accidentally revealed strange patterns beneath the earth. But it wasn't until archaeologists started digging that they realized this wasn't just some ancient structure. It was an entire city designed in perfect concentric circles with 2 defensive walls and underground drainage system. Symmetrically laid out streets. And most astonishing of all, everything was aligned with precise astronomical points. Every corner of Arcane seemed built to track the sun, the moon, the major constellations. Not a single stone was placed at random. Researchers began calling it a prehistoric astronomical observatory, so advanced it surpassed even civilizations we consider older. Though it's estimated to be around 4,000 years old. Aram shows a level of urban planning, mathematical precision and cosmic awareness that even early Egypt or Mesopotamia would struggle to match. And then after a few centuries it was abandoned. No signs of war. No fire. No plague. The inhabitants simply vanished. As if the city was never meant to be lived in. Only built to fulfill a purpose. And once that was done, sealed off forever. What's even more mysterious is that Arcane isn't alone. Scattered throughout the southern Ural Mountains and the edges of southern Siberia are dozens of similar circular structures forming what's now known as the Arcane Life Circle. Each ring is thought to play a specific role in some kind of ancient cosmological system. According to some theories, this region was the center of an ancient Aryan civilization whose belief system connected heaven and earth, matter and spirit, humans and the stars and Arm. It may have been the energy focal point where spatial axes crossed and aligned. When Earth's energy grid maps are overlaid onto Ark's location, something strange shows up. It sits directly on a powerful intersection point, almost like a geographic chakra, where magnetic and electromagnetic energies converge. Maybe that's why locals have long avoided talking about this place or speak of it in hushed tones as if it doesn't quite belong to this world. During the Soviet era, Arcane was considered a sensitive site. Archaeological records weren't shared with the public for years. It wasn't until the 1990s that it was finally recognized as a cultural monument. But much of what matters most has still never been fully revealed. Some architectural blueprints have strange erased annotations. Magnetic readings from the area remain inconsistent. And satellite images taken at sunset show strange light phenomena coming from the center of the city, even though there's no longer any activity there. If Arcane really was an observatory or even an ancient energy hub, why wasn't it preserved? Why was so much about it made unclear? Disconnected? Confusing? Maybe because its sheer perfection is what made it dangerous. A circular city balanced with no signs of military or economic purpose. Built solely for one thing: to align humans with the order of the universe. A kind of living device that the modern world just isn't ready to comprehend. Or maybe Arm was never truly lost. Maybe it was simply erased from history because it didn't fit the narrative history was willing to tell. And if we really are following the faint traces of a buried knowledge, then Arcane might be the first gateway. A gateway not opened by hands, but by thought. Not leading us forward, but taking us back to the very beginning. After Aram, where ancient architectural perfection forces us to rethink the origins of human thought. The next step seems inevitable to look at the beings who once walked these lands, long before writing even existed. And deep inside a cave in the Alai Mountains lies a story modern humanity is only just beginning to hear. The Denisovans. In 2010, a tiny bone fragment, a child's fingertip, was found in Denisova cave in Siberia. Too small to raise any alarms in traditional archaeology. But when scientists ran its DNA through modern sequencing technology, everything changed. The genome didn't fully match Neanderthals. It wasn't Homo sapiens either. It was something else. Something entirely new. A third branch of human the history had forgotten. The Denisovans aren't myth. They were real. We have their DNA. We have a few fossil traces, though extremely rare. And strangely enough, their genetic fingerprint still lingers in modern humans, especially among populations in Melanesia, Southeast Asia, and even parts of East Asia. That means they didn't just exist. They lived, reproduced, intermingled, passed on their bloodline, but somehow left behind no history, as if their memory had been intentionally erased, raising the unsettling possibility that someone or something made sure of it. What came next out of Denisova cave was even stranger. A massive mare. A skull fragment thicker than anything seen in modern humans. Tools crafted from bone and gemstones. Some so precise they featured perfectly drilled holes in chlorite bracelets. A technique that today would require high-speed rotary tools. Which begs the question, who taught them to do that? Or were they something entirely different? A controversial theory suggests the Denisovans weren't just an extinct cousin, but a physically advanced species, perhaps even cognitively superior. A form of intelligence that once walked beside us but didn't choose the same path as Homo sapiens. Maybe they were observers, keepers of knowledge. Maybe they were the ones who built the rings of Arm, then quietly stepped back. There are no written records of them, no surviving legends that clearly describe them. And yet they live on in our blood, in our genes, like lines of dialogue deleted from history's final script. Some researchers call it hidden genetic memory, an ancient program still running quietly in the background of humanity's operating system. Invisible, but there. Why were they forgotten? Were they wiped out? Did they choose to disappear? Or worse, did they know something humanity was never meant to understand? Maybe they weren't erased from history. Maybe history itself turned its back on them because their existence didn't fit the story we were writing. And maybe here in the Altai Mountains, where their trace still sleeps in stone, we're standing on the edge of two worlds. The one we've been told and the one that's never been spoken aloud. Because if memory can stay dormant in our DNA for tens of thousands of years, then maybe, just maybe, Siberia is still holding on to truths that haven't yet been awakened. If Denisova Cave is where anthropology touches the edges of forgotten history, then the Batchika crater is where the Earth itself can no longer keep its secrets. A literal crack. Not a metaphor. Not a theory. Ripping open in the frozen forest like the planet exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. But lies in the Sakha Republic of Siberia, also known as Yakutia. The locals don't call it by its scientific name. They call it the gateway to hell. That name doesn't come from superstition. It comes from lived experience. The ground trembles beneath their feet. A deep steady rumble like a heartbeat beneath the stone. And always there's that feeling that something is moving down there. Something you can't see, can't name, but everyone feels it. A presence alive or maybe something else. It started small. Just a shallow dip in the ground triggered after widespread deforestation during Soviet times. But then, like a chain reaction, the land began to sink. Every cold winter, every warming summer, the crater widened by tens of meters each year. Now, it stretches over a kilometer long and plunges more than 100 meters deep. One of the largest natural sinkholes ever recorded. But it's not the size that baffles scientists. It's what's being revealed. The exposed layers of soil are like a time capsule going back 200,000 years. Remains of prehistoric animals. Fossilized plants. Methane trapped since before humans ever walked the earth. It's as if Siberia has been holding on to the memory of the planet, waiting for the right moment to release it. But it's not just physical relics. Magnetic field sensors placed near the crater began picking up strange anomalies. Gentle electrical pulses. Frequency shifts with no clear source. Some research teams refused to return, citing vague reasons. Internal reports, only mentioning equipment interference and personnel disorientation. Local Ayan and Yakut legends speak of this land as a sealed place. Stories tell of an ancient rift where souls don't pass on, but drift underground waiting for release. These tales have long been dismissed as folklore. But when the earth itself begins to split open, maybe it's time to ask, were they telling stories or issuing warnings? A newer theory suggests Batagica isn't just a result of climate change, but a reawakening of an ancient geological depression, perhaps caused by a massive impact or explosion, or even the collapse of some forgotten underground structure. An ancient engineering shaft, tunnel, station into the deep earth, or something simpler, something that's waking up. Whatever it is. But Ajica is growing and nothing can stop it. Scientists call it a warning sign of extreme climate shifts. But the locals, they just shake their heads and say, the air doesn't open the earth. Something else opens the earth. Maybe what's opening isn't just the ground, but a deeper layer of perception. A layer humanity must face as the ice melts. As the structures of the present collapse and reveal what was buried long ago. And when physical gateways like Bagaga crack open, others within our minds, within our history, within our understanding won't stay shut for long either. And somewhere in those widening fissures, something familiar keeps showing up. Deep, perfectly round holes appearing suddenly in the earth, as if carved not by weather, but by intelligence. Another sign on the growing map of things science still has no name for. Another place not far from Bataga, where enormous craters appear without warning, and no one dares get too close. The first time it was recorded was in 2014. A massive sinkhole suddenly appeared in the Permafrost of Yamal, a region the indigenous Nets people call the edge of the world. The hole was nearly 100 feet wide and more than 200 feet deep, with walls so vertical it looked like something enormous had drilled straight into the earth. There were no signs of gradual collapse, no loud explosion, just a hole that was there. And within just a few years, more than 20 similar craters began to appear across the region. The initial explanation blamed it on methane gas building up underground, released when the ice melted due to climate change. A kind of slow, silent gas bomb. Lethal, but without noise. But something about that explanation doesn't quite hold. Why are the holes almost perfectly round instead of jagged and uneven like natural explosions? Why is there no evidence of fire? No burn marks. No char. And most puzzling of all, why did some magnetic field detectors near these sites pick up strange fluctuations just before the craters appeared? The local people tell a different story. They say this land once had gates that led deep underground, home to beings of light. In Nanette's legend, there's something called the breath of the earth, an invisible force rising from the deepest layers carrying memory, spirit, and sometimes punishment. When the holes began appearing, the people weren't surprised. They simply said, "They've returned." Back in the 1980s, some Russian researchers secretly surveyed land areas like these before any craters had even formed. What they found were massive underground erosion patterns resembling gas vents far too large for any known geological explanation. One report later pulled from circulation noted spiral-shaped cylindrical structures uniform in hollow space not likely to form naturally without directional pressure, and a central architecture. In simpler terms, it was as if someone had built breathing tubes for a system buried deep below the surface. What's even more intriguing is that the major craters in Yamal seem to form a nearly straight line pointing north toward what some believe was once the center of a long-lost frozen continent. Theories began surfacing again. An ancient energy grid or the remains of prehistoric underground structures. Maybe what we're seeing is the effect of something slowly waking up now that the ice, once the final seal, is starting to crack. Thermal satellite imagery over Yamal shows that these holes often appear after bursts of unexplained energy, despite no seismic activity. As if what's causing them isn't a physical shift, but an energy pulse coming from below. A kind of bioelectric breath. An ancient automated system. Or simply a warning sent after millennia of silence. No one knows for sure. Our instruments are still primitive compared to whatever's happening down there. But one thing is clear. Siberia isn't just melting. It's opening. And the holes in Yamal, they're like the first eyes opening to look back at the human world after a sleep far longer than history can measure. And if those holes are windows, then where's the door? Somewhere deeper, colder, darker than any of these craters. There may be a city, not on land, not in legend, but beneath the water, where no light has ever reached. Yet the stone still rises in the shape of pyramids. Deeper still, lake ball. And whatever rests at its bottom may challenge our most basic ideas of architecture, memory, and the story of what once was. They call it the blue eye of Siberia. But Lake Ball isn't just the deepest freshwater lake on Earth. It's a primordial rift in the Earth's crust, deeper than some oceans. A place where time doesn't seem to flow the way it does elsewhere. And sometimes, in rare, perfect moments, the ice and water reveal something different. Shapes that don't belong to nature. Pyramids, straight lines, sharp corners. As if something built once stood beneath its surface. The first reports of pyramids beneath Lake Bowl didn't come from archaeologists. They came from local divers, biologists, and fishermen. They spoke of large stone blocks stacked like steps, pyramid-shaped with flat tops or pointed peaks resting deep beneath the lake in certain areas, under specific lighting and weather conditions. Some of the formations reflected light like glass, suggesting the stone had been unnaturally smoothed. But that's all we have. Stories. No clear photos. No 3D scans. And no official survey has ever gone deep enough to confirm what might be down there. Why? No one really says. Just that any planned dives below 300 m have been called off. For technical and safety reasons. But the people living around the lake aren't surprised. They have their own legends that this place was once the center of the old sky where the gods descended from the stars and built an energy station to align the earth with cosmic rhythms. A place not meant for living but for tuning the flow of time itself. And when that alignment slipped, it was sealed. Not by nature, but by decision. Like cutting power to a control panel. Like locking down a forgotten system. Another theory, less mythical, but no less strange, suggests Bull didn't form naturally. With a depth of more than 1,600 m and nearly vertical walls, the lake doesn't match any other inland water system on Earth. Some geophysicists have found uplifted rock layers and curved fault lines at the bottom, almost as if the ground had been opened and then collapsed inward. And among those cracks, sonar scans have picked up formations that might be stacked stone structures. In 2009, a small research team claimed to have detected an unusual magnetic signal in the lake's southern basin, an area with zero artificial electromagnetic activity. The pulses weren't strong, but they were steady, repeating as if broadcasting something. But no one knows how to receive it. Is it an ancient device still running? A warning system? Or just the fading echo of something larger? That's slowly sinking out of reach. One of the questions that still puzzles researchers is this. Why does the pyramid shape appear again and again in ancient cultures from Egypt, South America, and China all the way to Siberia? Could it be that pyramids aren't just symbols of power, but something technological? A kind of energy collector? A connection point between layers of reality? So, the pyramid beneath Lake Ball might not be a ruin, but the last piece of a network that's long been severed. And water, depth, and silence have hidden it from the world ever since. But sometimes you don't need to see the whole shape to know something is there. Some divers have described the feeling of being watched when approaching those formations. The current shifts without warning. Instruments flicker with strange static. And there's always a low, distant sound, like a hum echoing from somewhere far deeper than the lake floor. Maybe it's just water pressure. Or maybe something down there is still alive or never stopped working. And if someone or something once built these structures, maybe they lived. Maybe they still dwell within the lake itself. Not just beneath the surface, but far deeper in the warm water pockets below the ice shelf. In that place, according to certain local legends, lives a creature never described in any official record of biology. But the stories have been told for centuries of an eye moving in the dark. A form with no clear shape. An ancient monster of Bull. Unlike the mythical beasts of the West, the monster here has no wings, breathes no fire, and never roars. It's as silent as the lake itself. Yet people feel watched. The most experienced divers in Siberia all seem to have heard the same kinds of stories. A strange sensation of being pulled downward, even with no visible current. Sonar picking up massive moving objects only for them to vanish without a trace. Voices echoing underwater, but never getting a reply. Some Soviet military reports from the 1980s even documented mysterious disappearances during training dives in Lake Bull. Cases where divers encountered unusually fast-moving objects measuring 20 to 30 feet, long unaffected by light, showing no aggression but triggering intense physiological panic. There's no video. No recovered bodies. Just stories. And those stories don't come from fantasists or thrill seekers. They come from soldiers, engineers, professional divers. People who don't scare easily and don't make up nonsense. They describe something pale and smooth, shaped like a long, seamless cylinder. No head, no fins, just a body that glides through the water, like a single fluid mass. Some even believe the creature can change color or blend into its surroundings like a kind of biological liquid the modern world hasn't yet identified. The native Burit and Evenk peoples who've lived around the lake for generations have legends of Lukut Khan, the Lord of the Deep, a being that never fully reveals itself but shows up as sound, as dreams or in the sudden swirl of a whirlpool. They don't fear it as a monster. They revere it as a guardian of the lake or perhaps its keeper. But it's this careful reverence that raises unsettling questions. If it's only a myth, why do they avoid fishing in certain areas even though the waters are teeming with fish? Why are some tiny islands declared off limits? No entry. No explanation. Some scientists have tried to ground the mystery in biology, suggesting the creature could be a massive undiscovered eel, a mutated catfish, or even the last survivor of an ancient reptilian species that made it through the Ice Age thanks to Bowl's depth and stable temperature layers. But with the lake plunging over 1,600 m deep, and with its unusual thermal inversion layers of warm and cold water stacked like a vertical labyrinth, research becomes nearly impossible. Anything below 500 m enters a realm with different pressure, magnetism, and microbial life, a realm we still don't fully understand. Then the questions get even stranger. If pyramidal structures really exist beneath Lake Bowl, could this creature be connected to them? Could it be more than an organism? Perhaps part of a system? Something designed or evolved to maintain balance in the lake? A form of technobiology, where living being and mechanism are one and the same. That theory becomes harder to dismiss when you realize electromagnetic anomalies often occur in the same deep water zones where reports of large unidentified movement have come from. If the bowl creature is real, it might not be a threat, but it might be proof that beneath the thin ice sheet of modern science, there are still dark places untouched by understanding. And it asks a much bigger question. If there are beings that exist outside human classification, what else could be out there living among us without a name in any language we know? Leaving the deep waters of Pal behind if we head south into the Shoria Mountains of the Alian Range. What waits for us there isn't a creature, but stone. And not just any stone. Not weathered boulders or fallen cliffs, but massive angular blocks stacked atop one another like some deliberate challenge to the laws of physics. Structures so immense they couldn't have been built by human hands. And no one can explain them. In this remote corner of the Shoria Mountains, virtually unreachable by road, local surveyors once reported a megalithic formation of stone blocks, stacked up to 130 feet high. Each block weighs anywhere from hundreds to thousands of tons. Some are twice the weight of the stones at the Great Pyramid of Giza, and many times heavier than those at Stonehenge. But what defies explanation isn't just their size. It's their shape. Flat surfaces, right angles, razor-straight edges. And they're fitted together without mortar with no signs of natural erosion or landslide displacement. Mainstream archaeologists have dismissed the site as a natural joint fracture system caused by ancient magma activity and glacial forces, which they claim split the rock into geometric shapes. But a single slab might fracture that way. Maybe even two. But hundreds of them stacked in square towers dozens of meters tall. That's not coincidence. That's intent. An intent no one wants to claim. There are no historical records, no cultural remnants, no pottery, no tools, just the stone. But that very absence has made the place feel untouchable. Some independent explorers describe the experience of standing among the stones as stepping into a place where time is frozen. Sounds warp. GPS signals distort. And in the deeper crevices, compasses spin aimlessly. Locals stay away. They call it the Nameless Stone Zone. A name spoken with quiet reverence. Some Evank legends say the site was once the stone hand of giants beings punished for trying to lift the earth itself in defiance of the sky. Of course that's metaphor. But if the theory of the Denisovans, those towering advanced human ancestors, is real, then maybe this was their work. Or perhaps it's the ruined foundation of something even greater long buried beneath snow and time. Satellite images reveal something even more curious. The blocks at Shia don't seem randomly scattered. They align along what appear to be linear patterns, suggesting collapsed walls, corridors, or possibly a larger structure. Was this once a fortress, a ritual center, or maybe even a gateway leading downward connecting the metal domes of Yakutia? The tunnels beneath the Alai and those strange round craters in Yamal. There's a pattern forming structures too massive, too precise, and too clean of human trace. As if all surface evidence had been pulled back, leaving only a cold, undeniable skeleton behind. And if the stones of Shora are the remnants of some lost architectural wonder, then what destroyed it? Was it an ancient war? A cataclysm never recorded? Or worse, was it deliberately dismantled to seal something beneath? No one knows. But deep within those silent cracks, something still lingers. There are faint echoes, untraceable pressure, magnetic pulses, and a chill that can't be explained by temperature alone. What's even stranger is this. When compasses stop working, some military equipment still picks up a signal weak, unclear, but steady. And if something below is bending the magnetic field, then maybe we're closer than ever to the source of the disturbance. A place where the earth itself can no longer keep order. That place lies in Yakutia, a land without signal, without monitoring stations, where compasses spin like shattered clocks. But maybe if you listen closely enough, you'll hear what the metal has been whispering all along. Yakutia is a vast unforgiving land where winter temperatures drop below -60 degrees Celsius, and summer melts the permafrost just enough to expose soil that has never been touched by time. But what makes this place extraordinary isn't the brutal climate. It's what hides in the blank spaces on the map. Areas where no navigation system works. Civilian pilots call them gray zones. Regions where compasses spin, GPS freezes, and radio signals drop out without warning. And when they land, many report a strange breathless sensation, as if something unseen is pulling the very air from their lungs. Early explanations blamed it on natural magnetic interference, iron-rich rocks, costal instability, or the effects of the magnetic North Pole. But what puzzles scientists isn't the interference. It's the consistency. These magnetic anomalies always happened in the same exact locations at the same strength year after year. And stranger still, many of these spots match up perfectly with ancient ruins, or with places mentioned in local legends as forbidden zones. In 1979, a Soviet geophysical team conducted a survey in a barren part of western Yakutia. What they recorded was an unusual electromagnetic pulse, what they called low-frequency disturbance. Didn't make a sound, but it affected the human nervous system. People experienced dizziness, disorientation, and in some cases even mild hallucinations. Shortly after, the project was shut down. Equipment was recalled. Reports were classified. The area never mentioned publicly again. But the reindeer herders, who've lived in these parts for generations, never needed instruments to know something was wrong. They avoid valleys where the sky always seems grayer than normal, where birds won't fly and grass grows in strange patchy clumps. Some say that on windless nights they've heard a deep mechanical hum beneath the ground, as if some massive engine is turning slowly. Not from the surface, but from far below. Some modern researchers have proposed a bold theory that beneath Yakutia's permafrost lies an ancient metallic structure. Not quite a ship, not quite a building, but a colossal electromagnetic device that still operates. Just barely. This could explain the persistent magnetic interference and even the altered mental states reported by those who come too close. Others draw a line back to the metal domes reported in the Valley of Death. The idea is that these devices aren't isolated. They're part of a network. An ancient neural system, perhaps, where nodes of energy or information pulse silently across the land, connected through magnetic signals. Each point, a note in a forgotten symphony. No one alive remembers how to hear. Whatever it is, one truth remains. The places with the strongest compass interference also tend to exhibit biological oddities. Trees grow twisted, leaning in no consistent direction. Plants are stunted. Animals behave strangely. And people, they get lost. Not just geographically, but emotionally. They describe a profound sense of dislocation as if they've stepped out of place. Not just in space, but in time. Is this a natural phenomenon or the legacy of a civilization that mastered magnetism long before humans even knew what a compass was? No one has an official answer. Just the feeling that out there somewhere, the needle doesn't point north, points toward a void. A blank spot that's never been charted. And if something really is still functioning beneath Yakutia, then maybe it's not just broadcasting noise. Maybe it's sending a signal. But a signal meant for whom? And sent from where? When signals are distorted, when magnetic fields bend, you can still call it an unexplained natural phenomenon. But when stone, the Earth's oldest, most honest record, reveals objects that couldn't possibly exist in that layer of time, silence becomes the only response. Because if we accept that artificial metal lies buried in rock formed hundreds of millions of years ago, then we're also forced to accept something far more unsettling. That history wasn't just miswritten, it was reset. And that reset point may lie deep beneath the frozen ground of Siberia. This isn't myth. This isn't rumor. Fossilized artifacts have actually been found. A 3 centimeters rusted metal screw embedded in a 300-million-year-old stone slab discovered in Kamchatka. A mechanical gear frozen inside a block of coal dating back to the Permian period. An aluminum-magnesium alloy pipe excavated in the Iyatsk region buried in sedimentary rock so dense it shouldn't have been penetrable by anything softer than steel. Mainstream geologists have thrown out every argument they can. Archaeological contamination, modern forgery, misidentified samples. But when advanced analysis reveals alloy compositions that don't match any known industrial product, even those explanations begin to fall apart. What's more disturbing? Some of these objects show signs of precision machining. Flat cuts, spiral threads, features that seem straight off a modern assembly line, yet locked inside rock older than the dinosaurs. An internal report from Russia's Institute of Geophysical Sciences, circulated in 1996, included this statement. Certain metallic objects are encased in deep mineral structures that cannot form in less than 100,000 years with no viable geological mechanism to explain their presence. That report was never officially published. The artifacts no longer on public display. Some have been placed into storage for undisclosed reasons. These discoveries once made brief ripples in international media, but were quickly swallowed by silence, replaced with labels like out-of-place artifacts, a neutral term, neither denying nor confirming, just gently pushing the whole subject to the edge of awareness. But for those who study these cases closely, this isn't just a curiosity. This is a fracture in the timeline itself. Because if metal was machined hundreds of millions of years ago, there are only two options. Either human technological history stretches back into an unthinkably distant past, or other hands, not human ones, once existed, once built, and then vanished, leaving behind these fragments like a final whisper. There's even a theory that these fossilized artifacts are remnants of a civilization wiped out by a planet-scale disaster. A great flood, a pole shift, or perhaps even an ancient war using weapons we've never rediscovered. Screws, gears, pipes. They might be the last bits of a massive underground system, most of which has been crushed by time, rock, and ice, but a few pieces stubbornly preserved like a message time couldn't erase. It's like walking through the fossilized ruins of an ancient factory. Everything turned to stone, but still holding its form, still waiting in a sense to be powered back on. What chills researchers the most, though, is that some of these fossilized objects appear damaged, not by nature, but by deliberate force. Fractured symmetrically as if disabled, as if someone didn't want them to work again or worse was afraid that they might. After the fossilized artifacts, after the mechanical fragments locked inside prehistoric stone, the question becomes harder to ignore. If those objects were once part of a system, then where's the rest of it? What powered them? What kept them running? The answer might lie in one of the most isolated places on Earth, the Put-Ana Plateau, a desolate region where stone towers rise like forgotten antennas without a known origin, without a known purpose, or at least not a purpose we're ready to admit. Put-Ana is a vast maze of ancient basalt, believed to have formed from volcanic activity hundreds of millions of years ago. But something about it doesn't fit standard geological models. In parts of the plateau with no roads, no access, researchers have documented clusters of pillar-like rock formations towering between 15 to 50 foot tall, each with an eerily consistent diameter and a surface that's strangely smooth. They don't appear to have formed naturally. They're not anchored to the surrounding bedrock. They look like they've been placed intentionally, either standing alone or grouped in 3s and 5s, often aligned with local magnetic anomaly points. Limited geophysical surveys have detected faint magnetic disturbances at the base of these columns. The frequencies are low but steady, as if the pillars are quietly emitting some form of energy. They don't glow. They don't vibrate. But sensors show interference when brought near. And curiously, life in the region, as scarce as it is, behaves strangely. Birds circle the area in looping patterns. Grass leans in the same direction. Animal decomposition is noticeably slower than in surrounding zones. One semi-official theory calls these formations erosion-resistant volcanic plugs, ancient magma channels and zones. One semi-official theory calls these formations erosion-resistant volcanic plugs, ancient magma channels exposed unevenly over time. But if that's true, why are they all so uniform? Why are their edges so sharp? Their surfaces so untouched by erosion or sediment layering? And why do they only appear in spots with electromagnetic irregularities? The locals don't offer explanations. They just stay away. In the Dolan and Evenk languages, these places are called the silent pillars or the still standing ones. The belief is that long ago, the old ones used them to call the sky, not with words, but with energy. A ritual so ancient no one remembers how it worked. But its form lives on in stone. Mainstream archaeology has never published official studies on the Put-Ana pillars. partly because the region is so remote and partly because no one wants to name something that doesn't fit into a category. Because if these are artificial, who built them? And why build them here in a frozen wasteland where no one lives? No one travels. Maybe that's the reason. A place where no one would interfere. A place where a signal could be sent undisturbed. One independent research team once directed a radio pulse at one of the larger pillars. What they received back wasn't clear. But it wasn't noise. It was a repeated signal. Simple pulses repeated 4 times. Then silence. There's no explanation. The equipment could have glitched. Or maybe the pulse was just bouncing off the rock. But here's the strange part that has never happened with any other type of stone. Some believe these are ancient energy transmitters. Towers designed to receive and emit frequencies that stabilize magnetic fields, or maintain a network we haven't yet identified. Could they be linked to the metal domes reported in the Valley of Death? Or are they central nodes in a buried system? Each one a note in a map only the Earth knows how to read. No one can say. But one thing is clear. These don't look like natural formations. They look like remnants of a blueprint. Fossilized devices. Whispers of forgotten technology encoded in the oldest material of all. The stone towers of the Put-Ana Plateau aren't just geological anomalies. They raise a much larger question. What if they're part of a forgotten system of orientation? One where placement, shape, and electromagnetic activity were all meticulously calculated. If an intentional energy grid once spanned ancient Siberia, then Put-Ana may be just one node in a far greater design. A map where energy centers align not by geography, but by cosmic and spatial axes. Within that framework, one location stands out. Mount Belukka, the highest peak in the Alai Mountains. And strangely, ancient tradition, modern geomagnetic surveys, and even paleogeographic data all agree on one thing. This place is not just a physical high point. It's a convergence zone. A calm in the storm of energy fields. While the pillars of Put-Ana show periodic emission, Belukka is something else entirely. It's a static center. A place of absolute energetic stillness where surrounding space seems to hold its breath. The idea of an energy triangle isn't just folklore. Research teams from the Soviet era and independent expeditions since then have recorded anomalies around Belukka. Magnetic field disruptions, spontaneous electrical currents, and mild neurological effects in those who spend extended time in the area. The space around the mountain seems to compress. Not physically, but emotionally. Some explorers describe losing all sense of time. Hours at the base feeling like mere minutes. Others report hearing faint singing from the cliffs. Not wind, but something softer. Almost like a voice. What makes Belukka even more remarkable is how ancient myth and geography overlap. According to many esoteric texts, Belukka is said to be one of the gateways to Shambhala, the legendary realm described in Tibetan and Mongolian Buddhist traditions as the keeper of ultimate knowledge and primordial energy. And as it happens, the Alai Mountains, home to Belukka, sit right at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, prehistoric migration paths, and even modern geomagnetic energy lines. Western mystics in the 20th century referred to Belukka as one of Earth's chakras, a spiritual energy center where knowledge isn't spoken, but felt. The rivers flowing from the glacier are believed to carry a living frequency said to influence the molecular structure of those who drink it. In fact, experiments have shown water from Belukka's ice contains strange structural oscillations not found in other glacial sources. It's not the water that's different. It's the mountain that births it. And it raises a deeper question. Why do sacred sites across the ancient world? Egyptian pyramids, Angkor, what? Stonehenge, all sit at magnetic intersection points. And why does Belukha follow this same pattern yet has never been formally recognized as a man-made structure? Maybe because it isn't man-made. Maybe it's natural and chosen or shaped in a time when architecture didn't separate humanity from nature. Belukha has no stone walls, no carved monuments. But around its base, small stone towers have been built, spiraling or forming circles. In some places, if you stand just right at night, the North Star aligns perfectly with the peak. That's not coincidence. That's a signal. Not a path outward, but inward. Not a destination, but a connection. And maybe that's why Belukha is always accompanied by quiet warnings. This isn't a place for just anyone. Not everyone is meant to stay. Over the years, some have disappeared here. Archaeologists, geophysicists, climbers. A few returned, changed, not wounded, but with eyes that seem to be staring at something far beyond this world. From the summit of Belukha, Siberia stretches out like an endless white sea. But perhaps beneath that silent frost lies a world more radiant than memory itself. When every myth points north, when the ancient Greeks spoke of a land of light where the sun never set, when Indian scriptures described immortal realms near the pole, when Tibetan monks told of Shambhala and Mongolian shamans whispered about Ulam Daga, these voices seemingly scattered across civilizations may all be sketching the outline of a lost continent erased from every map. Hyperia. Hyperia isn't a modern invention. It dates back to the 5th century BCE, mentioned by Herodotus, celebrated in Pindar's poetry, and shown on ancient maps now locked away in the Vatican. The Greeks believed Hyperia lay at the far north, a place where people lived for thousands of years without war or illness, where music echoed through the air, and civilization lived in harmony with the rhythm of the cosmos. But strangely though, the Greeks never reached Siberia. What they described matches perfectly with the energy patterns around Belukha, the submerged pyramidal shapes in Lake Baal, and the ancient stone circles scattered across the cold expanse. Could it be that Hyperia isn't fantasy, but memory? Not a location, but a frequency, a kind of knowledge that once existed, but could never be written down, only felt through vibration and geometry. In the 20th century, several researchers tried to pinpoint the true location of Hyperia, using the Pyrus map and forbidden ancient records. They all zeroed in on the same region, northern Siberia around the Kars Sea, the Taimyr Peninsula, and the far northern edge of the Verkhoyansk Range. They claimed this area was once the heart of a forgotten continent long before the ice buried its cities, turned temples to stone, and memory into myth. But some clues remain. Satellite images near the Arctic show faint linear patterns beneath the snow, traces of architecture. Magnetic surveys detect anomalies resembling those found in ancient energy zones. And more curiously, ice core samples from the region reveal that it once had a temperate climate where plants thrived and crops could grow. So what happened? A polar shift? A cataclysmic war? Or a decision to seal it all away? One radical theory suggests Hyperia wasn't just a civilization. It was a central station in a global network. One node among others like Atlantis, Lemura, and Mu. A living crystal grid with Siberia as both the outermost and innermost point. And when that network collapsed, Hyperia didn't fall to enemies. It was sealed by its own people. They didn't flee. They became part of the system. They became the geography, the rock, the magnetic field. And today, You can only sense them when you're tuned to the right frequency. A mountaintop. A stone circle. That strange vibration in your chest when the compass begins to spin. It's no coincidence that so many Soviet expeditions to the high Arctic were cancelled or vanished. Records sealed. Flight routes over the North Pole adjusted. Whole regions still marked geologically inaccessible with no clear climatic or security explanation. As if something is sleeping. A machine. A consciousness. Or maybe just a memory too vast to contain. Some believe Hyperia never really disappeared. It just shifted into another state. One we can no longer reach because our language has changed. Our heartbeat has changed. Our frequency is off. And maybe that's why every effort to find it has failed. Because we're looking with our eyes when we should be listening with resonance. If Hyperia is Earth's sealed-off memory, then Mamaeve is where that memory begins to fracture. Not in myth. Not in invisible energy. But in something physical. Bones. Skulls. And footprints far too large to be ignored. And for that very reason, they had to be denied. Because what happens when a human skeleton over 3 m tall is unearthed in the Siberian wilderness? Not once. Not by amateurs. But by professional survey teams with formal equipment and systematic records. The answer? Nothing. Because every one of those records, once existent, vanished. And the name Mamaeve, once a major archaeological hotspot during the Soviet era, disappeared entirely from official maps. Today, Mamaeve Kirin is best known for the towering Motherland Call statue in Volgograd. But few know that during the excavation to lay its foundation in the late 1950s, workers uncovered massive stone slabs deep underground along with human bones that didn't match any known species. A fur over 120 centimeters long. A skull twice the volume of a modern human's with a vertical forehead and suture lines unfamiliar to any known hominin. These remains were immediately transferred to a scientific team at the Soviet Institute of Anthropology. But within months, all reports were pulled. The artifacts disappeared. And every scientist involved was reassigned to unrelated fields. One geological engineer, according to his son's later account, secretly kept a fragment of bone. After the fall of the USSR, it was analyzed. The results were stunning. Bone density far beyond human norms. Collagen traces suggesting a living height of up to 3 m. And most strikingly, calcification patterns indicating exposure to extreme pressure or heat. No official explanation was ever given, but independent researchers began to speak up. One theory proposed that Siberia was once home to a race of giants, either a lost human offshoot or a genetically engineered species from before the Ice Age. Some connected them to the Nephilim of ancient religious texts. Others believed they were remnants of a forgotten experiment, long buried beneath layers of shifting earth and ideology. Indigenous Yakut and Caucasus communities share eerily similar legends. They speak of the skybearers, giant beings who appeared like mist, lived in remote mountains or underground, and never harmed humans but would not allow trespassers. Entire regions are considered sacred, not for vague spiritual reasons, but because, as they say, there are sleeping giants there. In light of what may have been buried at Mamaeve that no longer sounds metaphorical. Declassified Soviet-era notes often repeat the same phrases. Unfit for publication contradicts evolutionary theory. Disruptive to ideological order. Which means the issue was never whether the bones were real. The issue was if they were real. Everything we believe about human history would need rewriting. But perhaps the most unsettling idea is this. What if those beings never went extinct like the Denisovans? Maybe they didn't vanish. Maybe they went underground, survived in deep valleys, or simply left behind other things in their place. Magnetic fields, stone structures, energy systems we mistake today as natural formations, and in some areas around Maui, strange electromagnetic signals are still recorded despite no infrastructure. Military communications have experienced interference when passing over the region. Low-flying aircraft have reported sudden pressure anomalies over flat terrain. And satellite images have captured massive trench-like imprints running through nearby valleys as if something once moved there. Something massive. Something heavy. And yet left behind no trace except magnetic imbalance. Could the giants be real? Not myth, but the true rulers of a forgotten chapter in history we were never meant to read. Could those bones, those footprints, and those shifting frequencies all be pieces of something much larger? A civilization that didn't speak, didn't write, and left behind no monuments, just presents. And if that's true, then maybe the giants never truly disappeared. They simply stepped back into shadow so a new order could take the stage. But their shadow still lingers deep across the ice of Siberia, waiting for someone brave enough to finally face it. When the giants quietly stepped back from history, they left behind no message, but the spaces they vacated in the forests, in the mountains beneath the stone, were soon filled by something else. Belief. Not organized religion, not doctrine, but the breath of the soul woven into everyday life. And in the frozen lands of Siberia, where death and life are separated by a single veil of mist, no people have kept that belief more faithfully than the Ankh, a nomadic people of the tiger, who see the forest not just as home, but as the border between two worlds. To the Ankh, the world isn't singular. Every mountain, river, and great stone has a spirit, not metaphorically, but truly. They believe there are gateways usually found in places where the earth suddenly drops, where lakes are impossibly deep, or where the wind never passes through mountain cliffs. These aren't just sacred places. They're thin places where the veil between realms is so sheer that a soul can slip through. They call that realm bugger. Not just the afterlife but a parallel reality. A place where the spirits of ancestors continue to live, but also where unnamed beings are born. Every event shaman spiritual travelers who enter trance states must learn how to walk through the forest without losing their way. But what they walk through isn't trees. It's the second layer of reality. One of the oldest of Ankh rites is the three-level journey. The middle world, the lower world, and the upper. In dreams, they speak of strange travels where they meet eyeless ancestors who speak in images or beings of light that make sound without speech. Certain places are believed to be entry points, so potent that even locals won't stay past sunset. Not because of demons, but because of fear they might forget the way back. And strangely, many of these so-called gateways correspond with geological and electromagnetic anomalies noted by modern scientists. Places where compasses spin, radios crackle, and animals flee without cause. While researchers debate data, the event just shrug and say, "That's not our place." There are Soviet-era records of Evang shamans being invited to participate in geological or military expeditions in the far north. Some refused, not for political reasons, but because they didn't want to reopen the old roads. Maybe they saw something modern instruments could not. A few told stories of hearing voices in the stone. No words, just rhythm. A deep drum-like sound from beneath the earth, and sometimes sounded like breathing as if something were asleep or waking. Modern science calls it auditory hallucination. But if generations hear the same hallucination, Is it still imaginary? In the 19th century, European mystics described Siberia as the spiritual gateway of the continent. Not because it was sacred, but because it was empty. Empty enough for another world to touch this one. In that vast silence where physics yields to perception, maybe all religion began. Not with sermons, but with stillness, where a strange bird call, a sudden drop in fog, or a feeling that doesn't belong to your body, becomes a message. Maybe in the places where giants once walked, all that remains now is the breath of spirit. And the Ankh who built no temples, wrote no books, and formed no sects still carry that ancient rhythm in their drums, in their chants, and in their sacred silence. But the most haunting stories are those of the shamans who never returned. Not because they died, but because they went too far. Some who came back spoke of lands without snow, of glowing architecture, of beings without form, places where they were only visitors. So maybe their beliefs aren't just mythic remnants. Maybe they're fragments of a knowledge system that once ran parallel to the ancient civilizations. Hyperia, Atlantis, Lemuria, where layers of reality weren't divided by reason, but flowed like a bloodstream. And if that's true, then maybe the gate is still open. Not by map, not by GPS, but by the only instrument humans have yet to measure: consciousness. And in the place where the boundary between life and death, real and unreal, spirit and matter, is thinnest. Someone once found a perfectly preserved body buried in the ice for 500 years. Strange tattoos, a serene expression, as gently closed, like someone dreaming of a world that never truly left. An ice mummy, a woman, and maybe a shaman, one whom time has yet to touch. In 1993, on the Yukok Plateau, where Russia, China, and Mongolia converge, a team of archaeologists led by Natalia Polismak uncovered an ancient Pazaric burial site. Buried deep within the permafrost was the nearly intact body of a woman wrapped in ancient linen and fur surrounded by strange burial items. But what stunned the world wasn't just the state of preservation. It was the quiet presence of something no one could explain. The body, over 500 years old, still held her facial expression, her hair, her fingernails, and most striking of all, tattoos along her shoulders, arms, and fingers, intricate designs of beings, half animal, half divine, marked with symbols that resembled ancient script or energy diagrams. Experts in sacred geometry suggested the tattoos weren't decorative. They were encoded a kind of energy map or symbols meant to protect the consciousness in the afterlife. She's been called many names: the Ice Princess, the Yukok Priestess, the Silent Woman. But what no one can forget is the look of her face, as gently closed, yet somehow not at peace, not melted, as if she hadn't died, but merely gone to sleep, as if she was part of a ritual so advanced modern humans no longer have a word for it. Her body showed no decay, no disease, no signs of trauma, but her burial was unusual. Not placed in the typical Pazaric noble fashion, but isolated offset almost like a forbidden zone. And when her remains were removed from Yukok for study, a series of strange phenomena followed. Sudden snowstorms, tremors across the Alai, a region normally quiet on the seismic map. Many locals believe her removal was a grave mistake, that her body wasn't meant for research, but for guardianship, a living seal. Alai elders pleaded for her return. They held prayer ceremonies, apologies. They believed she wasn't just a woman, but a bridge between worlds. A being capable of maintaining balance between realities. A consciousness traveler of the ancient world. One who could walk between life and death as ritual. And her mummy was the silent reminder that the boundaries between dimensions are thinner than we think. Years later, when her body was scanned with advanced imaging, scientists discovered she had suffered from a serious illness. But instead of physical deterioration, her body had been preserved in a state of serenity. It raised unsettling questions. Did she die from disease, or did she choose to leave the material world before the illness could claim her? Was her death a ritual, a release, or a kind of transformation we no longer understand? Some scholars believe she wasn't alone, that she was one of the chosen individuals with rare genetics or knowledge laid to rest at planetary energy nodes to keep Earth's energetic grid from collapsing. A kind of living anchor between planes of reality. And if the tattoos on her skin are maps, then perhaps they don't lead to treasure. They lead somewhere else. To the snow-covered stone statues standing silently in the wilderness. No faces. No eyes. Just meditative forms waiting. As if they too are listening for a summons the world has long forgotten. Hundreds of stone statues like these have been found scattered across southern Siberia, especially in the republics of Tuva, Altai, and Caucasia. Some are so worn by wind that their forms are barely recognizable, but others still carry sharp, haunting expressions. Half-closed eyes, hands resting calmly at the waist, bodies upright with an aura of meditation or guardianship. Some statues are under a meter tall. Others stand over 2. But none bear names. And no archaeological record fully explains who they were, what era they belong to, or why they're there at all. Archaeologists have suggested they date back to the late Bronze Age or early Iron Age, possibly linked to the Okinav, Tagar, or Saiyan cultures. But none of those cultures left behind human statues on this scale. And no one can explain why these statues found across vast isolated regions share such an eerily uniform appearance. They don't look like the products of diverse tribal beliefs. They resemble ritual modules initi, a kind of repeating template made for a purpose modern language no longer has the tools to describe. Some theories call them ancestral effigies, but if so, where are the names, the tribal markings? And why do most of them face the same direction, north or northwest? Are they watching something, guarding something? Facing a gate that no longer exists? Tuva legends speak of those who do not decay. Not the living, not the dead, but living memories preserved in stone to guard the balance between realms. Each statue, they say, is a sealed doorway, a kind of lock, not made to commemorate, but to contain. And when one of these statues is disturbed, they say the land itself will begin to breathe again. A strange phrase, but haunting, as if the earth once spoke and had to be silenced. Some modern mystics compare these statues to the moai of Easter Island. Meditative expressions, forward F-facing gazes, absolute silence. But the moai have names, culture, oral history. The Siberian statues have none of that. It's as if they weren't built to be remembered, but to be forgotten. And what disturbs researchers most isn't just their presence. It's how they react to modern tools. Magnetic readings around some statues show unexpected fluctuations, as if something more complex than stone lies buried beneath the permafrost. Infrared photography taken at night has recorded faint heat emissions from some statues, even when there's no visible energy source. But strangest of all are the statues that have disappeared, documented decades ago on archaeological maps. Now gone. No evidence of removal. No sign of destruction. Just gone. That absence in its own way feels like part of something bigger. As if the statues weren't just artifact, but part of a larger mechanism quietly at work. They don't need worshippers. They don't need light. They don't even need to be known. All they seem to require is time. Time enough to hold still. Like invisible anchors stabilizing something beyond human understanding. And perhaps that's why the question has begun to shift. Maybe these statues aren't remnants of history. Maybe they're indicators. Surface clues to a deeper, untouched layer of time. Because not far from this very region, there is a vast stretch of south-central Siberia that appears on no official maps, but is constantly whispered about in local law. The indigenous people speak of it softly, as if remembering something older than memory. They call it the land where memories return. Those who've set foot in that place all return with strangely similar stories. They say that if you stand there long enough on a windless afternoon in the middle of that silent snow-covered wilderness, you'll eventually feel a subtle tremor pass through your mind. Not a sound, but a quiet stirring as if something buried deep in the unconscious has been quietly awakened. And the terrifying part is that memory doesn't belong to your current life. You can't name it, but it feels disturbingly familiar. As if a part of you once stood in that very spot in a time long buried by history. Sounds like superstition. But over time, more and more people have visited this strange place and returned with experiences they can't explain, yet also can't deny. They speak of recurrent, eerie and vivid, of images with no identifiable source, etched into memory, like fragments of something long sealed away. Some say they've walked forest paths they've never visited before. Others claim they've lived there despite never having left Europe. The strangeness doesn't stop with memory. Even the landscape is unsettling. Trees twisted into spiral arches like gateways. Forest patches that grow in perfect symmetry. Too precise to be natural. As if someone or something designed them for a purpose we no longer understand. Modern science calls it false memory, induced recollection, or suggestibility in unfamiliar environments. But is it really illusion when people from different cultures, languages, and beliefs all dream of the same architecture, the same symbols, the same overwhelming feeling of returning to a place their brain can't name, but their body instantly recognizes as home? A French psychologist once conducted an informal, unpublished experiment. He brought 20 volunteers, none of whom had any prior knowledge of Siberia, to this region. He divided them into groups, cut off communication, and left them for 3 days. When he collected their dream logs, 14 participants reported visions of circular stone spaces, lights rising from beneath the ground, and the eerie sensation of being called by a voice that made no sound. One participant dreamed of dying, but felt no fear, only transformation, like shedding an old shell of the soul. Each dream a cryptic fragment, but together they resembled a map back to something that might just be a past life. The Evec people have an ancient word with no exact translation, Duna, which roughly means memory that comes from the earth. They believe certain places carry not their own memories, but the lingering presence of souls who once lived there and moved on. When a person with the right frequency draws near, the memory reactivates like a natural resonance. No one chooses it. No one can resist it. Some esoteric theorists believe Siberia was once a vault, not of books or carvings, but of living knowledge, stored not in stone, but in sensation, in emotional codes, each memory embedded in the earth's layers as energy only unlocking when someone tuned just right walks through. The memory doesn't come from within us. It comes from the ground. But when the ground speaks, sounds like your own voice. Some who've returned from that land report a lingering disorientation not of geography but of identity. One German businessman wrote, "I wasn't sure who I was for a week afterward. I didn't recognize my own face in the mirror. But I remembered the smell of wet wood from a place I've never lived. I remembered a path between two stones. And I remembered my name in a language that wasn't German. Was it a psychological disturbance? Maybe. But when many people suffer the same disturbance in the same place, maybe it's not a flaw in the mind. Maybe it's a collective reaction to something still alive, still stirring in the deep, silent heart of Siberia. When Siberia stirs hazy memories of places never visited, names never learned, and structures never seen, it's no longer just emotion. It may be the echo of an event, not from human history, but from before history began. And among the event, like many other indigenous peoples of the North, there exists a strange legend, one not tied to ancestors, forest spirits or river souls, but to something beyond all known categories. The gods of steel, beings from the sky, not born, not aged, they simply arrived. In ancient Evank stories, they are called by many names. The ones who wear light, the undying, the ones with skin harder than stone. No one knows where they came from, but everyone agrees they were not of this earth. The inks say they appeared in beams of light without sound, walking through air without leaving footprints, disappearing before sunrise. No one ever saw them build anything. Yet when they vanished, the stones stood in rows. Forests split into corridors and the ground began to hum like the slow, steady breath of something enormous. The strangest of these stories comes from Veroians, one of the coldest places on earth, yet burning with the heat of myth. There the people speak of a dream passed through generations. Every lifetime only one person in the village dreams of the man of metal. He does not speak, does not touch. He simply stands glowing softly like moonlight. And afterward the dreamer changes. They begin to say things they don't understand. They draw symbols no one taught them. And sometimes they walk into the mountains and never come back. Modern science would call this collective psychology, cultural memory, or the result of living in extreme environments. But how do we explain this? That these men of steel are described with uncanny similarity in Sumerian texts, in Egyptian carvings, in the star maps of the Dune people in West Africa, and even in the Nazca lines of South America. All speak of beings from the sky, bearers of knowledge, immortal, with bodies that shine or are made of metal. Some fringe scholars call this the ancient astronaut theory that extraterrestrials visited Earth tens of thousands of years ago, seeded wisdom, influenced evolution, and left. But in Siberia, it's not just a theory. It's a lived memory passed through generations through ritual, through places forbidden because the steel beneath is still warm. And perhaps it's no coincidence that many locations tied to the legends of the sky gods overlap with sites of buried metal domes, electromagnetic anomalies like those in Yakutia, and even fossilized artifacts that show laser-like incisions on ancient alloys. The intersections between mythology and archaeology are becoming too many, too specific to be called coincidence anymore. Fragments found in Siberia, strange metal alloys, polished spheres trapped in ancient ice, have all shown crystal structures that are clearly artificial, not shaped by nature. An internal report once presented at a Russian Academy of Sciences technical conference quietly stated, "Several samples display physical properties that cannot yet be replicated by modern techniques." So, if the gods of steel were real, Why did they come? And what did they leave behind? Some mystics believe they never fully left. That not all of them came from outer space, but from layered dimensions. Realities woven into ours only perceptible when human vibration matches theirs. That certain stone structures, the submerged pyramids of Lake Baal, or the gates described in shamanic rituals, are the leftover links between two realms. Maybe that's why some people in dreams or deep meditation still see them, standing there, saying nothing, doing nothing, just watching, not with the gaze of a ruler, but with the patience of one who waits for humanity to become mature enough to look back, not through telescopes, but through the mind. And if one day all these scattered fragments buried in stone, trapped in memory, whispered in legend, begin to click into place like pieces of a long-lost puzzle, we may finally realize we were never alone, and we were never truly on our own. Not all civilizations chose to leave behind temples, monuments, or towering stone relics to mark their existence. Some, if they ever existed, may have chosen a different path to hide beneath the ground. And among the ancient lands once believed to be centers of hidden knowledge, the Alai Mountains remain one of the most mysterious. Too vast to be ignored, yet too empty to be understood. Until scattered testimonies, magnetic readings, and a handful of classified maps all pointed to one thing. Beneath these colossal mountain ranges lies something that doesn't belong to natural geology. Tunnels. No one knows where they begin and no one has ever reached the end. But across eras from Tsarist Russia to the Soviet Union to post-Soviet expeditions, explorers and surveyors alike have reported geological anomalies that defy explanation. Hollow corridors stretching hundreds of meters, smooth symmetrical walls, uniform widths, perfect curves. These aren't random formations. They hint at artificial design created by a technology far beyond anything we have today. Some tunnels are set to connect hidden valleys across the Alai Range, boring through solid granite without leaving the slightest trace of drilling debris. No chisel marks, no tool residue, just passageways that feel cast from the earth itself. Dry, silent, unsettlingly still. In some areas, rocks show signs of heat-induced transformation, melted at extreme temperatures, then flash-cooled, forming localized glass-like surfaces. A process that would require an energy source science has yet to officially recognize. But it doesn't stop there. The magnetic field inside these tunnels behaves strangely. Compasses spin. Electromagnetic sensors detect rhythmic pulses. Infrared cameras malfunction deep inside. Backup batteries drain for no reason. Scientists refer to this as a self-resonating closed environment. But no one can answer who built it or when. The locals aren't surprised. They've always told stories of stone serpents running through the mountains. Places where the ancient ones once lived, once learned, and then vanished. In old shamanic rites, there's a phrase, the dark roads beneath the light, long believed to be metaphor now understood by some as literal. A path through a space that isn't of the surface, but doesn't quite leave it either. Some esoteric researchers believe this is part of a global network like the underground cities of Cappadocia, the tunnels beneath Ecuador, or those hidden under Tibet. But the Altai system is different. It's sealed. Most of its known entrances are blocked not by human effort, but by synchronized natural events. Sudden landslides, permafrost collapses, or mysterious immovable stones that modern machinery can't budge. One declassified Soviet military report recorded a survey near Koshag where ground-penetrating radar detected a hollow tube over 800 m long cutting through solid bedrock. When instruments were placed at the tunnel's entrance, they recorded echoes that didn't weaken with depth. They got louder as if something was replying. Not words, but rhythm. Some audio specialists found the echo frequencies matched low alpha brainwaves, the same patterns associated with deep human meditation. Was it biological coincidence? Or were these tunnels designed not just for physical travel, but for communicating with consciousness itself? So, then these aren't tunnels. They're conduits, gateways across space, time, or even thought. A few theorists suggest the system once transmitted wave-based energy linking ancient centers of knowledge from Baluka to Baal, from the vanished Hyperia to the Himalayas. Whatever the truth is, the network may not be fully dead. Some deep-frequency monitors still pick up pulses. Some mountaineers report strange hums when placing an ear to the earth. And if we're tracing the arteries of a forgotten civilization, then a lie isn't a ruin. It's the wiring, the conduit, a buried vein in a planet that may once have been alive. And if there were tunnels, then above them the ancients may have left markers. Not with signs, but with towers. Not towers of light. Not satellite antennas. Stones still standing across Tanu Ola, broadcasting in a frequency we could feel but cannot measure. Stone. Antennas transmitting and receiving even now, long after we forgot how to listen. But maybe they were never turned off. The locals don't call them stone pillars. They call them katig, those who stand still to listen. They're not symbols. They're not shrines. They're functional. At least that's how the oral tradition describes them, as listeners of the earth. No one in living memory built these towers. They've simply always been there. Unmoving. Weather-worn. But strangely reactive. Not to time or temperature, but to something else entirely. Magnetic fields. Frequencies. And sometime people. The stone towers of Tanuola typically stand between 2 and 5 m tall. Their structures are almost eerily uniform. Their surfaces unusually smooth. They appear alone or in groups of 3 to 7 spaced apart with mathematical precision. From above, LiDAR imaging reveals their placement forms geometric patterns. Rosettes, spirals, even perfect hexagonal grids. They resemble sound waveforms or crystal lattice structures. Archaeologists, unsure what else to call them, label them undefined megalithic relics. A definition that says nothing. But geophysicists and electromagnetic researchers have started to take notice. When placing electromagnetic oscillation sensors near some towers, they detected extremely low-frequency ELF waves recurring but not synced with Earth's natural geomagnetic cycles. These frequencies don't interfere with electronics, but they do interact with biology. EEG scans have shown that people standing near certain tower clusters begin to exhibit synchronized brainwave activity. Alpha waves. Calm. Meditative. As if the human mind somehow starts to resonate with the stone. So if the stone is transmitting a frequency, who designed it and why? A controversial theory has emerged. These towers weren't built as static monuments, but as biological transmitters. Not for radio, but for living data, for thoughts, frequencies, energetic instructions. According to this idea, Tanuola was once a node, one of many in a prehistoric energy grid that spanned the globe, a system that connected Baluka, Hadarana, Lake Baal, even the Himalayas. But if that's true, what was being sent through them? A planetary system for regulating the biosphere, a call and response signal, a symphony between Earth and something not of Earth. In 1984, a rare Soviet research report measured the tower's spectral output, and recorded harmonic oscillations of unknown origin, repeating on a 9-minute cycle. There was no explanation. No follow-up. The report disappeared after an internal censorship sweep. Only a few sentences survived, copied by a student in turn. Years later, that same student returned to the site. He said that every time he neared the towers, he felt his body being recalibrated. Not pain, not confusion, just a strange sensation. My heartbeat slowed, he said, and my mind no longer felt the need to ask questions. Maybe the most unsettling possibility isn't that these towers were once active, but that they still are. And if they're still transmitting, who's receiving? Who's sending? Or maybe Earth itself is the entity, and these towers are nerves stretching upward through the crust, antennas feeling for imbalance, sensors registering that something somewhere has fractured. If memory can be stored in DNA, if information can be transmitted through frequency, if stone can vibrate, and the planetary grid was once a living system, then a library doesn't have to be made of brick, wood, or parchment. Deep in the most silent, cold, nameless reaches of Siberia, there exists a whispered theory passed through folklore scattered across redacted documents and echoed in the recurring dreams of strangers who have never met. A library buried underground, not built to preserve knowledge, but to hide history that was never meant to be told. Among the Yakut, the Avantank, and other indigenous groups spread across Siberia, there's an old warning. There is a place you must not seek, because to find it does not mean to understand it. They don't call it a library. They simply say it is where stone can read and ice can remember. And those who enter it, if they ever return, come back with eyes that no longer look the same, as if they've lived multiple lifetimes. Or worse, seen everything. In the late 19th century, a Russian geological survey near Kutsk recorded something unusual. Miners digging into ancient limestone encountered perfectly symmetrical circular chambers tens of meters deep. The walls were lined with stacked stone slabs like shelving. No organic material was found, but at the center was a solid black stone, smooth as glass, cold, polished. But the reflections it cast was slightly off. Light bent around it. Shadows twisted. Some workers became nauseous. Others lost their sense of direction. A few broke into tears for no reason. The site was quickly sealed off. It vanished from all future mining maps. From there, the legend of a stone library spread through European occult circles. Some believed it was a surviving outpost of the mythical First Library of Alexandria, a center of knowledge encoded not in words, but in waveforms, materials, and resonance. Those who got close enough didn't learn. They remembered as if standing near a transmitter, and the mind simply recalled. Mainstream science rejected the idea, but it still couldn't explain certain anomalies. Electromagnetic fields that fractured unusually structured stone formations, and signs of artificial chambers too deep to have been made by any known civilization. In archived Soviet military diagrams from Stalin's era, several sites were labeled with the cryptic phrase information field instability. No scientific definition exists, but the phrase appeared over 10 times, always in the same sector of southeastern Siberia. So if such a library was real, who built it? Ancient humans? The Denisovans? Or something older than evolution itself? And if one day the ice melts, the earth splits, the stone towers transmit the right signal, and the gate reopens, then the first thing we find may not be knowledge. It may be a guardian, not living but not quite dead. Event legends describe them as the faceless ones, draped in shimmering armor, motionless in the snowstorm, vanishing the moment they're seen. They call them by a simple name, the ones in silver. No one knows what they are, but those who've seen them never question again whether we're truly alone. It wasn't just once, and it wasn't just one person. Stories of them have been surfacing since the 19th century, recorded in the journals of Siberian survey expeditions, whispered in Evenk and Yakut oral traditions, and noted by nomadic Kazakh herders in the Far East. The descriptions don't always match perfectly, but the pattern is always there. Taller than any human, upright posture, clad in fabric or armor that glinted like metal, a face too vague to describe, standing motionless in the snow, unaffected by wind or cold, and always in the middle of a snowstorm. Some saw them from a distance, dismissing it as illusion. Others encountered them up close, only for the figure to vanish the moment their eyes met. No flash, no sound, just a thick fog that suddenly congealed and then dissolved, leaving behind a heavy stillness in the chest, like waking from a dream that didn't belong to you. In 1956, a Soviet geological team reported witnessing a sourceless light during a 2 a.m. storm. Temperatures were far below freezing, yet instruments recorded a sudden rise of nearly 5 degrees in one spot, right in the eye of the storm. No aircraft, no lightning, just a shifting form like a body made of metal gliding through the mist. The report was classified, but one engineer remembered. His mechanical wristwatch stopped the exact moment the figure passed, and it never worked again. Science tried, as always, to explain light refraction through ice crystals, neurological disturbances from oxygen deprivation, extreme polar meteorology. But as with so many anomalies, the sheer variety of attempted explanations only weaken the foundation of them all. Because if it's just hallucination, why does it repeat across regions, across centuries with such eerily consistent details? Some fringe scholars suggest the silver ones aren't biological beings at all, but the projected forms of a non-physical intelligence, one that can adjust its waveform to appear at the boundary between physical reality and human consciousness. And when snowstorms erupt, disrupting electromagnetic fields and clouding all sight, those boundaries become thin. For just a moment, certain doors open, and what steps through isn't here to talk. It's here to check, to observe, as if returning to a place it once knew. Long before we ever learned how to record memory, there's an old Evenk legend that says, in the coldest season, when snow breathes in clouds, the people of light return to see if we still remember. They do not speak. They only stand. And if no one recognizes them, they leave, taking with them a piece of memory that will never come back. A poetic tale, but one that carries an unsettling weight. Because the real fear isn't that the silver ones are coming. It's that they once belonged here and now they return only briefly like echoes from a chapter never written. So where did they come from? Were they the gods of steel from the sky that appear in ancient myths? Are they the guardians of energy gates slowly reopening beneath the ice? Or were they the last ones to enter the buried library beneath Siberia? And if the silver ones are a sign, a test, a warning, then those who've seen them have come to the very edge of another layer of reality. A layer that perhaps certain Soviet expeditions once reached and never returned from. There were no official disappearances, no reports of accidents, just silence. Files were marked inaccessible. Names quietly vanished from systems. Communication equipment was retrieved and labeled damaged. In some cases, family members were told not to speak publicly. Draft articles were pulled from newsroom archives. Test footage was overwritten. And the people? No graves. No funerals. One of the most striking cases happened in 1982. A 12-person expedition entered the Kodar Mountains in the Transbaul region after receiving reports of unidentified frequency pulses. For the first 3 weeks, their transmissions were steady, then radio silence. A search team was sent in 10 days later. They found the campsite intact. Equipment still running, but no one there. No signs of struggle. No blood. No footprints leaving the site. Everything was in place. Even a kettle of water still warm. The only clue was the final line in a field journal timestamp 3:47 a.m. The light is back to the east. The echo is clearer this time. The rock pulse is faint. We're going deeper. If we're wrong, this may be the last. No one knows what the light was. There was no further description. Explanations followed. Subsurface collapse. Sudden weather. Mass psychogenic episode. But if that's the case, why were all systems untouched? Why was there no seismic data? And why did an internal security unit arrive afterward? Not to rescue, but to seal the area for 3 months. This isn't an isolated story. In northern Tunguska, a team of young biologists vanished in 1966. A civilian archaeological group near Lake Labensier went missing in 1973. In 1991, an international expedition reportedly disappeared near the Lena River. Though no record of their arrival was ever published, there's always a quiet gap between the number who leave and the number who return. And no one ever explains it. Locals call these regions the open lands with no voice. They believe that when someone crosses a certain invisible threshold, they don't die. They simply stop belonging to this world. They aren't said to be lost, but kept as if Siberia itself is a sentient being. And some people simply chooses not to let go. The evangel of the keepers of the threshold. Formless beings who appear when someone gets too close to one of the ancient gates never meant to open. They don't attack. They don't speak. They simply show up. To remind us, not all knowledge is meant for us. Researchers studying these disappearances began plotting the incidents on a map. And the result? They weren't random. They formed lines. Paths that traced magnetic anomalies. Unidentified stone towers. Sealed artifact sites. And in the spaces between these lines were military-marked zones labeled inaccessible due to technical conditions. No further explanation. No details. Just a boundary line and a warning not to cross it. As researchers dug deeper into the center of those strange alignment points, one name began to surface again and again in the reports. The Lena River. This vast waterway stretching more than 4,000 km from Lake Bull to the Arctic Ocean has long been seen as the biological and geographical artery of Siberia. But perhaps beneath its frozen waters and icy sediments lies more than just layers of ancient geology. Maybe at the river's deepest floor, part of our history was buried. Not by time, but by decision. For years, radar imaging and subaquatic surveys of the Lena have revealed odd anomalies. Straight lines, precise angles, and evenly spaced stone steps appearing in scattered areas along the riverbed, especially near the remote northwest reaches of Yakutia. Sonar scans at depths of over 40 meters have revealed massive flat stone blocks arranged in terraces or column-like formations that do not match the natural geology of a riverbed. First, the assumption was simple. ancient rock formations or collapsed land masses. But in 2004, a research team digitally reconstructed a section of the river floor. And what they found was harder to dismiss. Perfect symmetry. Column spacing measured in nearly exact meters. And most baffling of all, a segment that looked like a submerged stone bridge connecting the river's narrowest crossing point. Roughly 300 m long, 8 m wide, with crisp 90-degree edges like a road. Drowned. No one could explain it. What made it even stranger was this. The site of this structure perfectly overlapped with coordinates once marked by the Soviet military as a geophysical magnetic instability zone. A label often used for locations with unexplained electromagnetic activity or conditions deemed incompatible with natural geographic environments. Locals along the Lena have spoken for generations about the cities in the water. Places they say once glowed, then went dark when the ice came. They don't call it Atlantis. They don't know what a civilization is. They simply say people lived under the river. Not like fish like us. But they're gone now. It sounds like legend until stone samples were recovered from the riverbed near the anomalies. Analysis revealed signs of thermal cutting, not shaped by water or ice. Some slabs showed evidence of intense localized heating, enough to vitrify the outer layers, an effect possible only with immense energy like plasma or laser. But how long ago? No one knows. The sediment layers above those structures date them to at least 10,000 to 14,000 years old. A time according to mainstream history when Siberia was just emerging from the last ice age, when there should have been no architecture here at all. Some alternative scholars believe these could be the remnants of an ancient glacial city, built before Permafrost when Siberia had a temperate climate. Others propose something bolder. That it was once an energy station or information hub, built directly into the riverbed as a bridge between dimensions. A node in the same network that connects the tunnels beneath Altai, the stone towers of Tanuola, and the signals that still whisper across the ice. And when that system went dark, the ice and water weren't accidents. They were released to seal it shut across all the archaeological, geological, and biological anomalies scattered throughout Siberia. From the buried metal domes in Yakutia to fossilized artifacts embedded in prehistoric stone layers to geometric structures beneath Lake Bull and energy-emitting stone towers in Tanuola. One strange pattern keeps surfacing. There is no evidence that humans ever built them. No tool marks. No signs of habitation. No cultural debris. It's as if these things were simply placed, fully formed, then left behind. Some metallic artifacts uncovered in Kutsk and Shora are composed of alloys unknown to modern industry, featuring micromechanical structures with atomic-level precision. They were embedded in rock layers dating back hundreds of millions of years, forcing skeptics to dismiss them as hoaxes. But when top laboratories found no signs of forgery, another possibility had to be considered, that something non-human was once present here. Something that didn't fit into our timeline or our evolutionary framework. It wasn't just about artifacts. Some locations held carved stone patterns with advanced mathematical properties, four-dimensional projections, fractal geometry, non-Euclidean ratios. In the Verkhoyansk Mountains, towering stone columns are aligned to the Fibonacci sequence. In a cave in southern Alai, spirals are carved in synchronization with gamma wave frequencies. This isn't art. It isn't faith. It's code. Some suggest this may be the lost legacy of a northern Atlantis. Others speak of the Denisovans, a species that evolved in parallel to us but far beyond us. But the most compelling theory, increasingly difficult to dismiss, is this. A non-human intelligence once operated in Siberia. A life form with biology, cognition, and technology unlike anything we know. These beings left no graves, no visible cities, no surviving language, but they left behind evidence of their ability to manipulate matter, energy, even magnetic fields in ways we still can't comprehend. Researchers who proposed this idea were pushed to the fringes of academia, but the evidence never vanished. Military instruments once recorded subterranean frequency pulses beneath Siberia. Rhythmic, stable, and unlike any known natural source. A civilian radar station in Yakutsk once detected a consistent signal for 27 days straight. Then it stopped as if someone or something below had been trying to send a message and then gave up. If all these fragments, the stone towers, underground tunnels, fossilized machines, the submerged bridge beneath the liner, if they all fit together, then we are forced to confront something deeply unsettling. Humanity may not have been the first intelligent species to master technology on this planet. And we may not be the most advanced. Siberia, or with its buried domes, its explosion without impact in Tunguska, its unexplained signals from deep underground, and its faceless beings in the snow, may be safeguarding a blueprint the world was never meant to see. No other place on Earth holds so many overlapping layers of mystery. Archaeology, geology, biology, meteorology, physics, and memory, all of it coexisting, all of it silently unconnected, not because of a lack of data, but because the connections are too terrifying to accept. And so it has been hidden. Maps redrawn, reports retracted, non-compliant details erased, not because they're false, but because they're too precise to ignore. Fossilized relics still hum, energy points still pulse, and from deep within the silence, Siberia asks a question larger than any theory. Who is controlling the truth? Is it the very institutions that funded the expeditions only to bury the results? Is it history itself shielding us to maintain a narrative we can live with? Or is it simply the oldest human instinct to reject anything that lies beyond language and understanding? Siberia has never needed to speak. Its existence alone is enough. A blank space between the map and the mind. A whisper that truth cannot stay buried forever. And when the last of the ice melts, when the final stones crack open, and when the same stories are repeated enough times to no longer be called coincidence, we may discover that what's waiting to be decoded isn't just a lost civilization. It's us.